In the remote valleys of Colorado, where the Rocky Mountains cast long shadows across forgotten settlements that time seems to have overlooked, there once stood a town called Cedar Hollow. It was a place so isolated that the nearest neighbor was 40 miles away, so small that everyone knew not just each other's names, but their secrets, their dreams, and their daily routines. The year was 1962, and Cedar Hollow existed as many such communities did, clinging to survival through mining operations, sustained by the stubbornness of families who had called this harsh landscape home for generations. But on the morning of October 15, 1962, Cedar Hollow became the site of one of the most baffling and disturbing mysteries in American history, a case so inexplicable that it would challenge every assumption about what was possible in the rational world of the modern age. The town's population that autumn consisted of exactly 87 souls, 34 adults ranging in age from 19 to 73, and 53 children from infants to teenagers just shy of their 18th birthdays. These numbers were precise because Cedar Hollow maintained meticulous records, partly from necessity in such an isolated community, and partly from the habit of people who understood that they existed on the margins of the larger world and needed to account for themselves with careful attention. What made the events of October 15th so shocking was not just the disappearance itself, but the absolute completeness of it. When the sun rose that Tuesday morning, every single adult in Cedar Hollow had vanished without a trace, leaving behind 53 children who woke to find themselves utterly alone in a town that had been transformed overnight from a functioning community into something that resembled an elaborate stage set abandoned by its performers. The first indication that something was wrong came from 12-year-old Sarah Morrison, whose testimony would later become central to understanding the events of that night. Sarah had awakened earlier than usual, disturbed by what she described as the quiet, an absence of sound so complete that it seemed to press against her eardrums like physical pressure. In a normal morning in Cedar Hollow, the day would begin with the sounds of adults preparing for work, children being roused for school, and the general bustle of a community beginning its daily routine. But on this morning, Sarah found herself surrounded by a silence so profound that she could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. When she called for her parents, her voice seemed to be absorbed by the air itself, producing no response and somehow failing to carry, even to her own ears, with the clarity she expected. Venturing from her bedroom, she discovered that the house felt different in ways she could not immediately identify. Not exactly empty, but somehow hollow, as if the life had been drained from it during the night. Her parents' bedroom was undisturbed, the bed made with the precision that her mother always maintained, clothes laid out for the day that would never come. But there were no signs of their presence, no indication of where they might have gone or why they would have left without waking their children. Most unsettling was the complete absence of personal items that adults carried with them. Wallets, keys, watches, even shoes were all left behind, suggesting departures so sudden that there had been no time for preparation. Sarah's experience was replicated throughout Cedar Hollow, as one by one the children awakened to discover that they were alone. Tommy Blake, age 7, found his father's coffee cup still warm on the kitchen table, steam rising from liquid that suggested departure within minutes of his awakening. 15-year-old Michael Chen discovered his mother's reading glasses sitting open on a book that was still marked to the page she had been studying, as if she had simply vanished while in the act of reading. The pattern that emerged from these discoveries defied logical explanation. Adults had disappeared from the middle of activities that suggested no advanced planning or preparation. Tools were left abandoned in the middle of projects, meals were half prepared in kitchens, and personal belongings remained exactly where they would have been placed during normal evening routines. Most disturbing was the complete absence of any signs of struggle, violence, or distress that might explain such sudden departures. As the children began to gather in the town center, seeking comfort and answers from each other, the true scope of their situation became clear. Every adult was gone. Parents, grandparents, teachers, the town doctor, the sheriff, even the oldest teenagers who had recently turned 18. The age division was absolute and inexplicable, creating a boundary that seemed to have been drawn with supernatural precision. The children's initial attempts to understand their situation revealed details that would later become crucial to various theories about what had occurred. 9-year-old Lisa Peterson reported that she had heard singing during the night, not the kind of singing that came from human voices, but something that seemed to arise from the earth itself, a melody that made her feel sleepy and happy in ways that she could not explain. 8-year-old David Martinez described seeing lights through his bedroom window around midnight, not the harsh brightness of electric illumination, but something softer and more colorful that seemed to move in patterns that his young mind could not quite remember when he tried to recall them in detail. The lights had made him feel calm and unafraid, even though some part of his consciousness recognized that they represented something unusual and potentially threatening. Most intriguing were the accounts provided by the older children, whose more developed cognitive abilities allowed them to retain more detailed memories of the night's events. 16-year-old Jennifer Walsh reported dreams that felt more real than waking life, visions of adults walking peacefully through the town streets in the direction of the surrounding mountains, their faces expressing an emotion that she could only describe as relief, as if they were finally going somewhere they had always wanted to be. As we delve deeper into this impossible mystery, we must consider how reality itself seems to bend around certain events that challenge our understanding of the world. The story we're exploring forces us to question the boundaries between the possible and the impossible, between rational explanation and supernatural intervention. If you find yourself drawn to these enigmas that defy conventional understanding, I invite you to share your theories in the comments below and join our community of mystery seekers by subscribing to the channel. The children's survival during the first days after the disappearance demonstrated a resilience and organizational ability that surprised later investigators. Led by the oldest among them, they established routines for food distribution, assigned responsibilities for caring for the youngest children, and maintained a semblance of normal daily life despite the extraordinary circumstances they faced. But their behavior also exhibited peculiarities that would become important clues to understanding what had occurred. Many of the children displayed an unusual calm about their situation, showing less distress about their parents' disappearance than mental health professionals would later consider normal or healthy. When asked about their missing families, they often responded with explanations that suggested they possessed knowledge about their parents' fate that they could not consciously access or articulate. "They went where they needed to go" became a common response when children were questioned about the adults' whereabouts. This phrase appeared in interviews with multiple children who claimed to have arrived at this understanding independently, yet the consistency of their language suggested some form of shared experience or communication that they could not consciously recall. The first outside contact with Cedar Hollow came 3 days after the disappearance, when a postal delivery driver arrived to find a town populated entirely by children. His report to authorities described a scene that seemed to have emerged from some fever dream of abandonment and impossibility. Playgrounds where children played games with an intensity that seemed designed to distract from their situation. Houses maintained with mechanical precision by young people who had been forced to assume adult responsibilities overnight. Sheriff William Garrett, who led the initial official response to the situation, described his first encounter with Cedar Hollow as stepping into a world where the natural order had been inverted in ways that human experience provides no framework for understanding. His initial report noted that the children appeared to be physically healthy and adequately cared for, but their psychological state raised questions that conventional training had not prepared him to address. The children speak of their parents as if they know exactly where they are, but cannot or will not provide specific information about locations or circumstances, Garrett wrote in his preliminary assessment. When pressed for details, they become evasive in ways that suggest not deception, but rather inability to access information that they somehow possess. Most disturbing is their apparent acceptance of the situation, as if the disappearance of every adult in their community represents a natural occurrence that requires no explanation or investigation. The federal investigation that followed brought resources and expertise that local authorities could not provide, but also revealed the limitations of conventional investigative techniques when applied to phenomena that transcended normal categories of criminal activity. FBI agents, military personnel, and specialists in various fields descended upon Cedar Hollow seeking explanations that seemed to exist just beyond the reach of rational analysis. Agent Patricia Hendricks, who served as the federal coordinator for the investigation, documented evidence that challenged every theory proposed to explain the mass disappearance. The physical traces left by the vanished adults suggested departures that had been voluntary rather than coerced, yet the simultaneity and completeness of their leaving defied explanation through conventional means. We have identified no evidence of violence, coercion, or outside intervention that could account for the simultaneous departure of 34 individuals, Hendricks reported. Personal belongings, including items of significant monetary and sentimental value, were left behind in ways consistent with departures that were neither planned nor forced. Most puzzling is the complete absence of any tracks, vehicle signs, or other physical evidence that would indicate the direction or method of departure. The investigation's attempt to interview the children produced transcripts that would later be classified and sealed for reasons that were never fully explained to the public. The children's accounts contained details that seemed to describe experiences beyond normal human perception, references to communications that had occurred through means other than conventional language, and knowledge about their parents' fate that they claimed to possess but could not rationally explain. 10-year-old Amanda Foster provided one of the most detailed accounts of the night's events, describing experiences that seemed to exist at the intersection of dream and reality. According to her testimony, she had awakened during the night to find her parents standing beside her bed, but their appearance had been somehow different, more peaceful and luminous than she had ever seen them, as if they had been transformed by some benevolent force. "They told me they loved me, but they had to go away for a while," Amanda reported. "But they didn't say it with their mouths. The words came from inside my head, and I understood that they were going somewhere beautiful, where they would be happy. They said the children would be safe and that someone would come to take care of us, but we needed to remember that what happened was good, even if it seemed scary." Amanda's account included details about conversations with other children during the night, communications that had occurred without any of them leaving their beds or speaking aloud. She described a shared understanding that developed among all the children simultaneously, a collective knowledge that their parents' departure was somehow necessary and beneficial, despite the abandonment it represented. Similar accounts from other children suggested experiences that challenged conventional understanding of consciousness, communication, and human perception. Multiple children reported dreams that seemed to be shared among the entire young population, visions of their parents walking peacefully toward a destination that appeared to offer peace and fulfillment that earthly life could not provide. The psychological evaluations conducted on the children revealed cognitive patterns that defied explanation through conventional developmental psychology. Despite the trauma of their abandonment, they showed remarkably stable emotional states and problem-solving abilities that seemed enhanced rather than impaired by their experiences. Most puzzling was their apparent possession of knowledge and skills that they should not have been able to acquire through normal learning processes. Dr. Robert Hillman, the psychiatrist assigned to evaluate the children's mental state, documented abilities that seemed to transcend normal developmental boundaries. Children who had never shown particular academic aptitude demonstrated sudden competencies in mathematics, science, and language that would have been remarkable in individuals with advanced education. More disturbing was their apparent ability to communicate among themselves through means that bypassed conventional speech and body language. The children display cognitive abilities that appear to have been enhanced by their experience rather than traumatized by it, Dr. Hillman reported. They demonstrate problem-solving skills, emotional regulation, and social cooperation at levels that would be extraordinary under normal circumstances and seem impossible given the traumatic nature of their situation. Most unsettling is their apparent ability to share information and coordinate activities through methods that I cannot identify or understand. The doctor's observations included documentation of incidents where children demonstrated knowledge about events occurring in other parts of the town without any apparent means of communication. They seemed to function as a collective consciousness that could access and share information instantaneously while maintaining their individual personalities and decision-making capabilities. As the investigation continued, theories emerged that attempted to explain the Cedar Hollow disappearance through various frameworks of understanding. Military officials suggested the possibility of secret government experiments involving advanced psychological warfare techniques or exotic weapons that could affect human consciousness. Scientists proposed explanations involving natural phenomena, unusual magnetic fields, atmospheric conditions, or geological factors that might have influenced human behavior in unprecedented ways. The extraterrestrial hypothesis gained traction among researchers who noted parallels between the Cedar Hollow case and reported UFO encounters in other locations. The children's descriptions of lights, unusual sounds, and altered states of consciousness seemed consistent with accounts from individuals who claimed to have experienced alien contact. The precision of the age-based selection criteria suggested intelligence and technology beyond human capabilities. Religious leaders and paranormal investigators offered theories involving supernatural intervention, suggesting that the disappearance represented some form of divine or spiritual calling that had summoned the adults to a higher plane of existence. The children's apparent peace with their situation and their inexplicable knowledge about their parents' welfare seemed to support interpretations involving benevolent spiritual forces. But perhaps the most disturbing theories were those proposed by researchers who suggested that the children themselves might have been involved in their parents' disappearance through means that transcended normal human capabilities. The children's enhanced abilities, their collective consciousness, and their apparent foreknowledge of events raised questions about whether they had been transformed by the same forces that claimed their parents, becoming something that was no longer entirely human. Dr. Margaret Chen, a specialist in anomalous psychology who was brought in to study the case, developed theories that challenged conventional understanding of consciousness and human potential. Her research suggested that the Cedar Hollow children had undergone some form of evolutionary acceleration that enhanced their cognitive abilities while establishing connections between their minds that enabled collective thought and action. What we are observing may represent a new stage in human development, Dr. Chen theorized. The children display capabilities that suggest consciousness has evolved beyond individual boundaries to encompass collective awareness and enhanced problem-solving abilities. If this transformation was triggered by the same phenomenon that caused their parents' disappearance, we may be witnessing evidence of directed evolution operating according to criteria that human science does not yet understand. The researchers' hypothesis gained support from neurological examinations that revealed unusual brain activity patterns in the Cedar Hollow children. EEG readings showed synchronized brainwave patterns that occurred simultaneously across multiple subjects, suggesting neural connections that should not have been possible through normal biological mechanisms. As months passed and the investigation continued, the children's adaptation to their circumstances became increasingly remarkable and unsettling. They developed social structures and decision-making processes that functioned with efficiency that surpassed many adult communities. Their collective care for the youngest members demonstrated compassion and competence that seemed to arise from enhanced empathy and understanding rather than learned behavior. But their development also included aspects that concerned the investigators assigned to monitor their welfare. The children began to display knowledge about subjects they had never studied and to demonstrate abilities that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. Some could predict weather patterns with uncanny accuracy, while others showed intuitive understanding of mechanical and electronic systems that enabled them to maintain the town's infrastructure without formal training. Most disturbing was their apparent ability to influence the thoughts and emotions of the adults who worked with them. Investigators and social workers reported feeling unusually calm and accepting when interacting with the children, experiencing thoughts and insights that seemed to arise from external sources rather than their own consciousness. Several officials requested transfers from the Cedar Hollow assignment, claiming that prolonged exposure to the children was affecting their ability to think independently. The decision to relocate the children from Cedar Hollow was made after 18 months of investigation, when authorities concluded that the town itself might be contributing to the anomalous phenomena observed in its young residents. Plans were developed to distribute the children among foster families and institutions throughout the country, in the hope that separation from their unusual environment might restore normal developmental patterns. But the relocation process revealed the extent to which the children had been transformed by their experience. They demonstrated profound distress when separated from each other, displaying withdrawal symptoms that resembled drug addiction more than normal attachment behavior. Several became physically ill when moved beyond a certain distance from Cedar Hollow, suffering symptoms that had no identifiable medical cause but resolved immediately upon their return to the town. The children's resistance to separation led to the development of specialized facilities designed to house them collectively, while providing the monitoring and care that their unique circumstances required. These institutions, established in remote locations and staffed by personnel with security clearances, became the permanent homes for the Cedar Hollow children as they continued their unusual development into adulthood. As we examine the long-term implications of this impossible case, we must ask ourselves what boundaries separate the normal from the extraordinary and whether some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. If you're fascinated by these explorations into the unexplained, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more investigations into the phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality. The adult lives of the Cedar Hollow children continued to defy conventional expectations and scientific understanding. Those who were studied into their 20s and 30s maintained the enhanced cognitive abilities and collective consciousness that had emerged during their childhood experiences. They formed communities within the specialized facilities that functioned with harmony and efficiency that seemed almost utopian, yet their separation from normal human society remained absolute. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who spent her career studying the Cedar Hollow subjects, documented their continued evolution through detailed longitudinal research. Her findings suggested that their transformation had been permanent and progressive, with new abilities emerging as they matured that seemed to represent an entirely different trajectory of human development. The subjects continued to display capabilities that expand rather than stabilize with age. Dr. Mitchell reported, "Their collective consciousness has evolved to encompass increasingly complex shared experiences and decision-making processes, while their individual personalities remain distinct and fully developed. They appear to have achieved a form of social organization that eliminates conflict through genuine understanding rather than imposed authority." The researchers' work also documented the subjects' apparent knowledge about the fate of their missing parents, information that they claimed to possess but could not communicate through conventional language. They spoke of their families as existing in a state of being that transcended normal physical existence, describing continued relationships that occurred through consciousness rather than physical interaction. The question of what actually happened to the adults of Cedar Hollow remained officially unsolved, though classified documents suggest that government investigators developed theories that were considered too sensitive for public disclosure. References in declassified materials point to phenomena that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and human potential. Satellite imagery from the period around the disappearance revealed unusual electromagnetic readings in the Cedar Hollow area, while geological surveys detected subsurface anomalies that could not be explained through conventional scientific analysis. Military documents reference experiments with technologies that might have affected human consciousness on a scale large enough to account for the mass disappearance, though the specific nature of these projects remains classified. The town of Cedar Hollow itself was eventually acquired by the federal government and designated as a restricted research area. The buildings were maintained exactly as they had been found after the disappearance, creating a kind of temporal museum that preserved the moment when an entire adult population had simply vanished from existence. Researchers who worked at the site reported phenomena that suggested the location retained some form of residual energy from the events of 1962. Electronic equipment malfunctioned in consistent patterns, while personnel experienced dreams and altered states of consciousness that seemed to provide glimpses into the experiences of the original residents during their final night. The few individuals who claimed to have encountered Cedar Hollow adults after their disappearance provided accounts that were dismissed by official investigators, but preserved in classified files for their potential research value. These witnesses described meetings with individuals who matched the physical descriptions of the vanished residents, but who seemed somehow transformed, more peaceful and knowing than they had been in life, possessing knowledge about existence that transcended normal human understanding. One particularly detailed account came from a hiker who claimed to have encountered the Morrison family, Sarah's parents, in a remote mountain area several years after their disappearance. According to his testimony, they appeared exactly as they had in 1962, but radiated a sense of peace and purpose that seemed almost luminous. They spoke of having found a place where consciousness could exist without the limitations of physical form, and they expressed gratitude for the experience that had allowed them to transcend normal human existence. The hiker's account included messages that the Morrisons claimed to send to their daughter, communications that were later confirmed to contain information that only Sarah's parents could have known. When these messages were shared with Sarah, now an adult living in the specialized facility, she confirmed their accuracy and expressed no surprise at their receipt, as if such communication was a normal part of her ongoing relationship with her family. The implications of the Cedar Hollow case extended far beyond the immediate mystery of the disappearance to encompass fundamental questions about consciousness, reality, and human potential. If the children's accounts were accurate, their parents had undergone some form of transformation that allowed them to exist beyond normal physical limitations while maintaining their essential identities and relationships. The government's continued interest in the case suggested applications that were considered strategically important but too dangerous or ethically problematic for public acknowledgement. References in military documents pointed to research into consciousness manipulation, enhanced human performance, and technologies that might allow for the kind of selective population effects observed in Cedar Hollow. The children themselves, now adults approaching middle age, remained subjects of ongoing study and monitoring. Their communities within the specialized facilities had evolved into self-governing societies that functioned according to principles that seemed to transcend normal human social organization. They showed no interest in integration with conventional society, claiming that their experiences had revealed the limitations and futility of normal human existence. Their continued collective consciousness allowed them to function as a unified entity while maintaining individual personalities and preferences. They made decisions through processes that involved direct sharing of thoughts and emotions, eliminating the miscommunication and conflict that characterized normal human relationships. Their society was characterized by complete honesty, genuine empathy, and cooperative problem-solving that seemed to represent an evolutionary advancement in human social development. But questions remained about the price of their transformation and whether their enhanced abilities came at the cost of something essentially human that they had lost. Critics of the research program argued that the subjects had been fundamentally altered by their experience in ways that represented a loss rather than a gain, that their apparent peace and harmony masked a form of spiritual or emotional damage that could not be measured through conventional psychological assessment. The debate over the Cedar Hollow subjects reflected broader tensions about human enhancement, consciousness research, and the ethics of studying phenomena that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality. While their abilities and social organization offered insights that could potentially benefit humanity, the circumstances of their transformation raised questions about consent, autonomy, and the right to maintain normal human existence. The legacy of Cedar Hollow continued to influence research into consciousness, human potential, and anomalous phenomena. The case provided evidence that suggested reality was far more malleable than conventional science acknowledged, that consciousness could transcend individual boundaries under certain circumstances, and that human evolution might involve possibilities that mainstream understanding had not yet recognized. Modern researchers studying the declassified materials from the Cedar Hollow investigation noted parallels with contemporary research into quantum consciousness, collective intelligence, and the potential for technological enhancement of human cognitive abilities. The case offered a glimpse into possibilities that current science was only beginning to explore through legitimate channels. The question of whether the Cedar Hollow transformation represented evolution or devolution remained unresolved among the researchers who continued to study the case. While the subjects had gained abilities that seemed miraculous by normal standards, they had also lost something that connected them to ordinary human experience: the struggle, uncertainty, and individual growth that characterized normal life. The town of Cedar Hollow remained a restricted site, its empty buildings serving as a monument to one of the most inexplicable events in documented history. The children's belongings remained exactly where they had been left in 1962, while the adults' possessions sat undisturbed as evidence of lives that had been interrupted by forces beyond human understanding. Visitors to the area, though officially prohibited, continued to report unusual phenomena that suggested the location retained some form of active energy from the original events. Strange lights, unusual sounds, and altered states of consciousness were consistently reported by individuals who managed to reach the site, while electronic equipment continued to malfunction in patterns that seemed to echo the original disappearance. The broader implications of the Cedar Hollow case for human understanding of reality, consciousness, and possibility remained largely unexplored by mainstream science due to the classified nature of much of the evidence. But the questions raised by the investigation continued to influence research into the nature of consciousness and the potential for human transformation through means that conventional understanding could not explain. As we reach the conclusion of this investigation into one of the most mysterious and disturbing cases in American history, we are left with questions that may never be answered and implications that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about the nature of human existence. The children of Cedar Hollow, now adults living lives that transcend normal human experience, serve as living evidence that reality contains possibilities that we are only beginning to understand. Their story reminds us that the boundaries between the possible and impossible, between science and supernatural, between individual and collective consciousness, may be far more fluid than we have assumed. Whether their transformation represents humanity's future, or a cautionary tale about forces that should remain beyond our reach, remains a question that each observer must answer for themselves. The empty streets of Cedar Hollow continue to echo with the memory of that impossible night when 34 adults simply vanished from existence, leaving behind children who were transformed into something that was simultaneously more and less than human. Their legacy challenges us to question our assumptions about consciousness, community, and the price of transcending the limitations that define ordinary human life. In the end, the shocking case of the town where everyone disappeared except for the children serves as a reminder that the universe contains mysteries that may be beyond human comprehension, and that some secrets may be too profound or too dangerous for ordinary understanding. The truth about what happened in Cedar Hollow may remain forever hidden in the spaces between the known and unknown, between the rational and impossible, between what we can accept and what we dare not believe. The secrets that disappeared with the adults of Cedar Hollow and the extraordinary abilities that emerged in their children continue to challenge our understanding of human potential and the nature of reality itself. Whether we view their story as tragedy or triumph, as warning or promise, depends on how we choose to interpret the evidence of possibilities that exist beyond the boundaries of conventional human experience. The investigation continues, but the answers may lie in realms that human science has yet to discover or dare to explore.